Next up, we have Bioxytran. They're an OTCQB company trading under the ticker symbol BIXT. The company is a clinical stage biotech with 3 revolutionary platform technologies that were quickly developed using the power of AI. They have a broad spectrum oral antiviral drug that recently completed clinical trials and achieved 100% viral reduction in 7 days, a feat only accomplished by one other drug in the past decade. Their drug is a galectin inhibitor that not only neutralizes COVID-19, but also neutralizes influenza and RSV and prevents it from entering cells. They're currently recruiting patients for their dose optimization study, which will give them the ability to proceed with their registrational trial in India after they finish. They have a second platform drug being developed to treat stroke, which is supported by an FDA-approved device that detects tissue oxygenation, and due to the molecule's small size, it has the ability to carry oxygen into the areas of poor circulation. And there's a third platform technology that is capable of treating cancer metastasis. Mike, it's great to have you back on the conference. I want to start off with some questions regarding your last press release on the universal oxygen carrier. So tell us a little bit more about what it is.
Well, Anna, first I want to thank you for having us back. We think that this is a great platform for companies to showcase their technology. Okay, so let me first explain what blood does before I can really get into the universal oxygen carrier. Blood not only carries oxygen from the lungs to tissues in need, but also carries essential nutrients like amino acids and glucose. Blood, what else does it do? It removes waste products like urea, lactic acid, and then carries away carbon dioxide. A universal oxygen carrier basically mimics just the oxygen transport function of red blood cells. See, what we do is we break up the red blood cell and then separate out and clean everything but the heme. Now, this isn't a simple process. We've got dozens of specialized equipment that's needed to process the blood, along with over 80 steps in the manufacturing process that ensure that we basically have this consistent product. The whole process is basically our intellectual property. We're interested in just the heme component because that is what carries the oxygen. We don't want the globin chains. Now, once we have the heme concentrated, we combine it with our carbohydrate drug to form the heme carbohydrate complex in an intravenous form. Just to help you visualize the product, it looks almost identical to red blood cells you would see hanging in an IV bag. So that's kind of what it is and how it's administered. But let's do a little bit deeper dive into the functionality of a universal oxygen carrier. The size is 1,000 times smaller than a red blood cell and is compatible for people in all blood groups. Another nice feature is a molecule stable at room temperature and doesn't need any refrigeration and can last up to 5 years.
So elaborate on some of the applications of the UOC, the universal carrier you just mentioned, and why it's so important.
Well, the primary application is anytime a blood transfusion is needed, okay? Now, a good example is a car crash where bleeding is involved, or really any type of surgery where there's some sort of blood loss. These are kind of like the run-of-the-mill applications, but I want us to look outside the box for a second at some other large-scale applications. What if there's a school shooting or, God forbid, domestic terrorism that results in a number of casualties? What are we going to do? We can't just, have a blood drive. These people need to be treated right away. What about natural disasters like hurricanes, tornadoes, or earthquakes? They have a tendency of cutting off access to our blood supply, especially if the refrigeration goes out. So I can see a number of scenarios where our universal oxygen carrier is actually stockpiled in strategic locations as a disaster preparedness measure. But I want to be clear on one point here, is that it's not, whatever we do here is not going to have any impact on the bottom line of our financial statement. Now, I want to talk about why it's so important, but first I got a question for you, Anna. And the question is, do you think you could hold your breath the entire time while I give my answers?
Well, the answer is no, unless you want to see me turn red.
You know, of course you can. And it's because that would put you in a hypoxic state. So we got to talk about this word hypoxia and what it means so everyone understands just how important this concept is. When people die, it's because they are in a state of extreme hypoxia. The word is defined as a lack of oxygen to the brain, and the true definition of death is when the brain finally runs out of oxygen. All people are born with their own hypoxic curve, and it tells how their body uses oxygen. Unfortunately, this is a downward sloping curve right after birth and ends pretty much in death. The fact is, the better you manage oxygen, the longer you will live. You want to be healthy? Yeah, manage your oxygen. You want to have less brain fog? You manage your oxygen. You want to have deep sleep? You manage your oxygen. Do you want to recover from exercise fast? Manage your oxygen. I hope repeating it helped everyone understand, and you get the point. You need to manage your oxygen. Now, if your oxygen curve, for anyone out there that's currently challenged, can only handle 1 point. And one piece of information, I want you to remember this 1 point. It's not manage your oxygen. The presence of oxygen is the absence of disease. The presence of oxygen is the absence of disease. Did I just basically say, if you're properly oxygenated, you won't get sick? I pretty much did. And there's a ton of science backing us up that shows every disease indication that has some little element of hypoxia associated with its pathology. So if you value the concept of long, healthy lifestyle, then what we're doing at Bioxytran is definitely going to perk your interest, and you should pay attention to this presentation. And I'm going to start my presentation right now. So let's switch over. You can see we're at here's our forward-looking statements. And then I repeat, the presence of oxygen is the absence of disease. The presence of oxygen is an absence of disease. So again, that one takeaway. And now what I have here is a little graphic of our solution for oxygenation. And it's what we call, it's an oxygen bridge. And I'm telling you not about the universal oxygen carrier. I'm telling you about Bioxytran's developing this drug, BIXT-25. And it's a hemoglobin-based polymer. It's 5,000 times smaller than a red blood cell. It can be used in both ischemic and hemorrhagic stroke, and it can penetrate a clot reaching the brain within 3 minutes. And this graphic kind of shows you what's going on. The blue represents the BIXT-25 oxygen carrier there, and you'll see it's going. The blood is basically clotted up there, but what's happening is the blue is going through. And please understand, the blue is like it's like a speckle compared to what it is. But so this is for graphical purposes, but it goes right through. So it provides complete oxygen. The idea and theory behind it is going to provide complete oxygenation in those ischemic regions. And the bottom line is reduction of time to needle. That's in stroke by 90%. So the idea is, you know, someone gets a stroke. Oh, you have a stroke. They look at you, and then the paramedic's going to introduce this molecule as an oxygen bridge until the person gets treated. Now, how does BIXT-25 work? I just kind of went over this, or how is it made? It's delivered via an IV solution. It's universally compatible with all blood types. That's a key point there. That's a key point. But that's for the universal oxygen carrier. For us, it doesn't matter. The body won't be able to see BXT25. And what we do here is we have an illustration of a blood cell, how we separate out the heme molecule, and you'll see that it's the thing that's carrying the oxygen. And that's pretty much it. But what I'm going to do is I'm gonna go back to my favorite slide here and keep that up while we continue on with the presentation.
Thank you, Mike. Yeah, when I heard you talk about some of the applications, my mind went right to what's happening around the world, Israel, Ukraine. I'm curious if the universal oxygen carrier could be used in battlefield conditions. Do you think there's any military use of this technology?
Anna, I'm not sure if you realize it, but I'm a veteran. So if there is something to save lives, I am all for it. I researched this topic. And the leading cause of death in the battlefield is hemorrhaging. When I mean leading, it's over 90%. The issue is that the soldiers can't get replacement blood quick enough, which means these deaths fall in the, quote, preventable death category. If these soldiers were in a hospital setting, their lives could have been saved because they would have had immediate access to blood. What the medics are armed with in the field right now is freeze-dried plasma. It's in a small little IV bag, and what the medic does is he adds sterile water to basically reconstitute it, and then it's ready for the wounded soldier. This freeze-dried plasma gives wounded soldier the clotting factors they're going to need to stop the bleeding. But what's missing? The oxygen carrying capacity. Now, in our 8K, we mentioned we're in the process of lyophilizing, or what is known as freeze drying, our universal oxygen carrier. So I can envision our product working side by side freeze-dried plasma. Once we prove that we can freeze rise and reconstitute our universal oxygen carrier, it's probably time to approach the military. I mean, what military wouldn't want something that's shelf stable for 5 years and turns into a universal oxygen carrier once it's reconstituted? This is almost a no-brainer, but why stop at the military? Why wouldn't civilian EMTs want this? This is almost a no-brainer, but so did you know that almost no EMTs in ambulances carry blood with them, except the ones in the helicopters? This could be a very powerful tool for them too. The concept is mind-boggling how this could change emergency medicine.
So, Mike, today you announced a joint venture with the Heme Foundation to fund the development of your universal oxygen carrier. So it seems their mission is to address this global blood shortage you mentioned, and they chose your technology. So give investors a little color on how this JV came together.
Yes, the founders of the Heme Foundation basically have the belief that the lack of access to blood is leading to millions of preventable deaths annually. And they basically want to do something about it. Here's a mind-boggling stat. 200,000 women in Africa die during childbirth. And 70% of the time is because they simply couldn't get a blood transfusion. Now, this sort of death is kind of tragic because it's preventable. If we had the global will to invest in the infrastructure needed to expand the blood supply over there, we wouldn't have these issues. This is where the Heme Foundation comes into play. There's a global shortage of blood supply, and the Heme Foundation was looking for a sustainable solution versus simply throwing money into developing a blood supply chain from scratch. You might not realize it, but there's a shortage in the United States right now, and we have state-of-the-art technology. So you can see it makes no sense to try to copy this model from the United States and then bring it to Africa and expect better results. We're having our own issues. Even with all our resources in the United States, we haven't solved the structural issues surrounding the blood supply. See, the challenges with blood is that you can use it for only 21 days. And after that, it drastically loses its ability to carry oxygen effectively. The blood also needs to be tested for pathogens to keep it safe while it's under constant refrigeration. See, these are the structural issues of the existing blood supply chain. And it's the constant replenishment that's needed as well. Let me talk about Africa. They need around 7 million transfusions annually, but only 50% of the people get them. That means there's millions of people in harm's way right now. So the Heme Foundation was looking for a real solution, not just a Band-Aid to save lives in the short run. They wanted a long-term sustainable solution, and a blood substitute just made the most sense. This is the primary reasons that we're working together. So, because our solution would enable large-scale manufacturing and stockpiling of the blood substitute at room temperature. The advantage of a blood substitute versus donated blood is that there's no pathogens to screen for, and no blood typing is needed before a transfusion. Having a universal blood substitute that doesn't require cross-matching, it's a big deal because there's 8 different blood types and they would each need to be stockpiled. It's a logistical nightmare. This is why we think with the help of the Heme Foundation, we can solve the world's blood supply shortage with our blood substitute. The project wouldn't even exist without the Heme Foundation because they don't have a profit motive. That's what needs to be taken into consideration. It's impossible to make money on this product when the competition is basically free.
So if BIXT can't make any money on the UOC, the Universal Oxygen Carrier, how is it going to benefit from this partnership?
Excellent question. The core technology applies to both BXT25 and the Universal Oxygen Carrier. The heme building block of BXT25 and the Universal Oxygen Carrier, they're the same, which means we can use the same manufacturing processing plant. This will bring down our manufacturing costs in the long run. The other thing, the MDX viewer is needed for the Universal Oxygen Carrier as well. Having this development completed benefits us when it comes time for us to do clinical trial development for BXT25. The toxicity studies in animals and humans are about the same, and the efficacy studies in humans will likely share similar protocols. So we actually derive a lot of benefit out of this JV relationships in terms of time to market and cost sharing. But remember, our money maker is going to be BXT25. Remember earlier in my presentation, I talked about how every disease has a little bit of hypoxia in it. This means we could have one of the largest platform technologies ever created. I seriously think we're developing a product many multiple of the sizes of Humira. That's a big deal. We see a potential use case for BXT25 in almost every disease indication. We think it's going to work in Alzheimer's. Keep in mind, we have a number of journal articles that show a reversal of cognition with hyperbaric oxygen treatment, and our drug would be hyperbaric oxygen treatment on steroids. Then we have stroke, dementia, and heart attacks. What they all have in common is blockage of blood flow. In stroke, it's to the brain. What about blockage in the heart in case of a heart attack? And many tiny strokes in the case of dementia. There's numerous case studies that show the benefits of hyperbaric oxygen therapy in these diseases. But again, it's too cumbersome to get HBOT therapy daily. And you lose ground if you stop for a little bit, which is why people don't embrace it like they should. BXT25 is HBOT therapy in an intravenous shot. So just remember that. It's HBOT therapy in an intravenous shot. And HBOT is a $3.3 billion business in the United States right now. And it's that with basically no insurance money backing it. And we have a disruptive technology that could make that obsolete. So investors got to ask themselves if a $20 million market cap for Bioxytran makes any sense at all, given it could be a game changer. Then what about sickle cell anemia? the patient creates clots that result in hypoxia, and BIXT tunnels right through those clots, keeping the patient oxygenated. There's also a rationale to use it on patients with traumatic brain injuries or patients afflicted with ARDS. Let's not forget, cancer hides from the immune attack by creating this hypoxic region in the body. Oxygen basically lights up the tumor and allows the immune system to see it and attack it again.
So where is the money coming from to bring it through these clinical trials? We only have a pledge for 10 million, but it's going to take at least, what, 20 million?
Well, okay. The Heme Foundation has made a pledge to do the heavy lifting for financing. While the pledge is only for 10 million, there's no reason why why they couldn't continue funding the project to completion. But our plans are essentially to pursue grant funding for the balance. We also think the DoD and the WHO would be very interested after our proof of concept. It's reasonable to think that these organizations would want to take the ball and run with it, which means they would be on the hook for doing the clinical trials. Now, I want to be clear. BIXT is not interested in commercializing this product because the risks are too high as a blood substitute for basically a company our size. Think about it, having to compete with bodily fluids that are donated for free. There's just no business case for blood substitute.
So why is it going to take 3 to 5 years to develop this product, given that the manufacturing is completed?
Well, just to give you an update, we're currently in the second year of the development plan. Drug development in general is a slow process, and very few drugs are developed in 5 years. In fact, the average time is 12 years and requires well over $1 billion in financing. We finished the first year, so we feel our development is on actually an accelerated trajectory. The other thing to consider is that we need the MDX viewer for our clinical trials, and that can be worked in parallel with our animal studies. But it's still going to take a year minimum. See, without the MDX viewer, it's going to take more time and money because we would need 4 times the number of people in the trials to prove our endpoint. The MDX viewer will instantly tell us that the oxygenation is being absorbed by the tissues, proving that our universal oxygen carrier is transporting the oxygen. This is the most efficient clinical trial development pathway.
So how does the UOC compare to other hemoglobin-based oxygen carriers?
We have a carbohydrate molecule. That's the primary difference. Other HBOCs use nanoparticles and encapsulation tricks to transport the oxygen. These other HBOCs have side effects like increased blood pressure and organ damage. The addition of the carbohydrate to the heme molecule has shown in animal studies that it basically prevents these sort of side effects. I don't want to get too far into the weeds with the science, but our heme carbohydrate complex is a true oxygen carrier versus some of the technologies like perfluorocarbons that basically rejiggle the oxygen in the affected region, hoping that the redistribution of oxygen helps the condition. Hyperbaric oxygen treatment, which I talked about earlier, is the only other treatment worthy of comparison, but even it has side effects and prevents people from having more than 1 hour treatment daily. Many might not know how hyperbaric chambers work, so I'll give you a quick tutorial, okay? 98% of our blood carries oxygen. That means 2% is the oxygen that's dissolved in blood plasma. The air we breathe is composed mainly of nitrogen, not oxygen. Oxygen only represents 20%. When we go into the hyperbaric chamber, what we're doing is increasing the percentage of oxygen flowing in our plasma. When you breathe 100% oxygen, it represents 5 times the oxygen concentration of air, doesn't it? This means at 1 atmosphere, the plasma is carrying 10% of oxygen versus 2% as us breathing air right now. At 2 atmospheres and on 100% oxygen, blood plasma carries 20% oxygen, again, versus 2%, right? The idea behind hyperbaric oxygen is that by loading the blood plasma up with oxygen, it's going to oxygenate the hypoxic regions of the body with your poor blood vessels. Now, there's a lot of research, that shows the benefits of HBOT therapy. One study stands out for me because it was an Alzheimer's patient, Alzheimer's disease patient that basically had 5 years of decline. And then she did a couple months of daily treatment, and it showed significant increases in her cognition. Then she took a break, and her cognition immediately declined. And then after a period, she started up again, and sure enough, cognition improved. There's other stories like this in journal articles that talk about stroke, dementia, and traumatic brain injury. Now, if you're wondering why people with these neurological conditions aren't flocking to the HBOT chambers, it's because Medicare won't pay, but they will pay for a very expensive pill that doesn't work. That they'll do. I'm just joking, but look, it's worth noting the real barrier is the time that it takes to get daily HBOT. Patients can do a max of only 1 hour daily. When we developed BIXT 25, we predict it could amount to the equivalency of around 18 hours of HBOT therapy with 1 intravenous dose. And there's no side effects. BIXT could basically multiply HBOT therapy by a factor of 18. The truth is, we don't know what 18 hours of continuous HBOT could do for the body, but we can speculate. Could this be the fountain of youth? I don't know. What I do know is that we need all the investor support we can get out there so we can bring this great product to market.
Well, with that, Mike, we've got a few minutes left. I'd like for you to touch on that exactly. Just some closing remarks. This is just fascinating technology that you have and so many great things going on. So with the last few minutes, I'd love for you to give us some closing remarks.
Yeah, there's one point that I wanted to make here. The galectin science is really starting to blossom, and people are seeing the value of it. I know there's a major readout coming in December for a galectin antagonist, and I want people to keep in mind that this is a big deal for us as well, because a rising tide lifts all boats, and investors need to remember that. So what's good for one galectin antagonist is good for another galectin antagonist. We think that that our molecule is going to be looked at by big pharma in a major way, and we're expecting good results from that other galectin antagonist that's reading out. It's reading out in MASH, and we're really excited. We're really looking for that. And we think that is definitely going to help raise the awareness level and help the company achieve its funding objectives in the future.
Wonderful. Well, we have lots of questions for you. We will send these so you can answer on your own. And is this a new business model at all?
Is this a new business model?
That's one of the
we've modified the business model. But no, we're still going after the same things. Remember, we're not making a business out of the universal oxygen carrier. We're leveraging that basic technology development for our oxygen transport molecule BIXT25.
Okay, great. Yes, Don just asked because the last presentation in July was a bit different. It seemed there's more of a delivery method and less of a therapeutic. What do you have to say about that?
There's more of a delivery. The difference between, we've talked about the difference between BIXT25 and the universal oxygen carrier. the universal oxygen carrier, they're two different molecules. So we need to be clear that they are two different molecules serving two different patient bases. We develop drugs, not artificial blood.
Okay. Okay. Well, thank you for clarifying that. And thank you for being back on our conference. And we always enjoy having you on and look forward to the next time you are. Thank you, Mike.
Love it. Can't wait to come back.
All right. Thank you. Stay with us. We'll be right back.